They called her
the Ghost. Sometimes, when they were feeling particularly cruel, the Mop. For 2 years, Anya Sharma haunted the sterile white corridors of Prestige Medical Center, a silent figure in worn grey scrubs, pushing a cart that always seemed to squeak just enough to announce her unwanted presence. She mopped up spills, changed overflowing bins, and endured the casual, cutting dismissals of men like Dr. Alastair Finch, the hospital's golden boy and head of cardiothoracic surgery. They saw a woman in her late 30s, gaunt and tired, with a pronounced limp that dragged her right foot in a weary semicircle. They saw the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her left hand. They saw a failure. They didn't know that the limp came from a shattered femur, courtesy of a 7.62mm round in the Hindu Kush. They didn't know the tremor was the ghost of a nerve injury sustained while holding a soldier's aorta closed with her bare hands for 17 straight minutes during a helicopter extraction under fire. They didn't expect that the quiet woman they mocked would one day hold the life of a 4-star general in her hands, in this very hospital, under these very lights. Anya Sharma wasn't just a janitor. Anya Sharma was a weapon, a shield, a legend, whispered in the most dangerous places on earth. They called her the Mop. But in the places that mattered, the places of blood and sand and valor, they called her Viper 6. The air in Prestige Medical was a carefully curated cocktail of antiseptic, floor polish, and the faint, cloying scent of wilting flowers in patient rooms. It was a smell Anya had come to associate with a different kind of war, one fought with insurance codes and social hierarchies instead of bullets and tourniquets. Her days were a metronome of quiet tasks. 6 a.m., disinfect the emergency department reception. 8 a.m., clean the attending lounge, a place where she was less visible than the expensive espresso machine. 10 a.m., scrub down OR 3 and 4 post-op. It was a rhythm of invisibility, a penance of sorts. She'd trace the old, faded scars on her forearms, hidden beneath the long sleeves of her uniform, and remember a world where her hands were instruments of salvation, not sanitation. Here, they were just things that held a mop handle. Dr. Alastair Finch moved through the hospital like a shark in a tailored suit, a wake of nervous residents and sycophantic nurses trailing behind him. He was handsome in a way that seemed manufactured for television, with perfect teeth and hair that never fell out of place. His Patek Philippe watch, a glint of ostentatious gold on his wrist, was as much a part of his surgical uniform as his arrogance. "People," he would boom, his voice echoing in the hallways, "we are not running a charity clinic. We are the pinnacle of private health care. Let's look like it. Let's act like it." His eyes would often land on Anya during these pronouncements, a flicker of disgust in their blue depths. She was an imperfection in his perfect world, a smudge on the polished lens of his ego. He never used her name. She was janitor, or her, or simply the target of a dismissive wave. Anya's locker was in the sub-basement, a damp, concrete room that smelled of bleach and mildew. Taped to the inside of the metal door was a single, creased photograph. A group of men and women in dusty fatigues, their faces grim but their eyes alive, huddled around a Black Hawk helicopter. Anya was in the center, younger, her face smudged with dirt and something that looked like blood, a weary but fierce smile on her lips. A man with a thick beard and a captain's bars on his collar had his arms slung around her shoulder. His name was Elias, and he died in her arms 3 days after that photo was taken. Sometimes, when the weight of Finch's contempt grew too heavy, she would trace Elias's face with her trembling finger. "Patience, Viper," he used to say, his voice a low rumble. "The snake waits. The snake always waits." And so she waited, mopping floors, her mind a razor-sharp scalpel, cataloguing the hospital's inefficiencies, the staff's sloppy protocols, Finch's terrifying, overconfident incompetence. She saw the tiny mistakes, the near misses, the shortcuts that luck had so far allowed. She knew, with the chilling certainty of someone who had seen countless systems fail under pressure, that one day luck would run out. The snake waits. One Tuesday morning, the waiting became harder. Finch was holding court in the attending lounge, bragging about a complex aortic valve replacement he'd supposedly performed flawlessly the day before. Anya was there to collect the trash, her movements slow and deliberate, trying to remain a part of the furniture. The resident Peterson almost botched the cannulation. "Kid has hands like feet," Finch laughed, and his audience of junior doctors chuckled on cue. "I had to, of course, step in and salvage the whole affair. It's what I do. It's why they pay me the big bucks." Anya knew for a fact, from the gossip of the scrub nurses she shared silent nods with, that the resident had performed the cannulation perfectly. It was Finch who had struggled, dropping an instrument and blaming the nurse before Peterson had calmly corrected the trajectory. She emptied a bin filled with paper cups and pastry wrappers, her expression a careful, blank mask. As she was backing out of the room, her cart's wheel caught on the leg of a leather armchair. A half-full mug of coffee, perched on the arm, wobbled, then tipped, splashing a dark, hot arc across the pristine, cream-colored trousers of Dr. Finch's $5,000 suit. The room went dead silent. The laughter died in the sycophants' throats. Finch looked down at the brown stain spreading across his thigh as if he'd been shot. His face, a mask of charming affability moments before, twisted into a gargoyle of pure rage. He didn't look at the cart. He looked at Anya. "You clumsy, useless woman," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. He snatched a cloth napkin from the table and dabbed uselessly at the stain, making it worse. "Look at this. Do you have any idea what this suit costs? It's more than you make in a year, a decade probably." He stood up, towering over her. She remained still, her head slightly bowed, her gaze fixed on the floor. Her heart was a cold, steady drum. Not fear. Never fear. It was a feeling far more dangerous. Control. She was controlling the rage that threatened to uncoil in her chest. "What are you waiting for?" he barked, his voice rising to a theatrical shout for the benefit of his audience. "Get on your knees and clean it up. Now." A few of the younger residents shuffled uncomfortably, but no one spoke. They were too afraid of him, too invested in his favor. Anya didn't move. The tremor in her left hand, usually a quiet flutter, was now a visible vibration. She clenched it into a fist at her side. She could feel the ghost of a cold, steel grip in her palm, the familiar weight of her Sig Sauer. A memory flashed. A marketplace in Kandahar, the smell of dust and cordite, a man in a politician's suit with a bomb strapped to his chest. Her hand had been that steady then, rock solid. "I said now," Finch repeated, taking a menacing step closer. He pointed a finger at the floor in front of his stained shoes. "Clean my mess." The humiliation was the point. The public degradation was the entire performance. Anya finally looked up, her eyes the color of storm clouds, meeting his for the first time. There was no defiance in them, no anger, just a deep, bottomless weariness that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. Slowly, deliberately, she knelt. Her bad knee protested with a sharp, grinding pain. She took a rag from her cart, the rough fabric a familiar texture. The room was suffocatingly quiet, the only sound the soft scratch of the rag on the fine Italian wool of his trousers. He smirked, victorious, looking around at his court. He had won. He had put the ghost back in her place. He had no idea that he wasn't putting out a fire. He was pouring gasoline on embers that had been glowing for 2 long years. He had no idea that kneeling was the position from which she had saved a dozen lives, a posture of readiness, not submission. The days that followed the coffee incident were a slow, simmering torture. Finch, emboldened by his public victory, escalated his campaign of petty cruelty. He would accidentally drop used gauze pads near her cleaning cart, then loudly call for a janitor to handle the biohazard. He took to calling her Stumbles when he thought she was just out of earshot, a cruel jab at her limp. The other staff, seeing which way the wind was blowing, followed his lead. The whispers grew louder. The stares lingered. Nurses would snatch charts away if she came too close to their stations, as if her poverty were a contagion. Anya absorbed it all with the same blank, unnerving calm. She retreated further into herself, her silence a wall they could not breach. Her work became even more meticulous. Floors gleamed, surfaces shone with a sterile perfection. It was her only defense, the one thing she could control: competence. Even in this, she would be perfect. Inside, however, the pressure was building. The memories came more frequently now, unbidden and sharp as shrapnel. A screaming child in a dusty village, a leg shredded by an IED. Anya, working by the light of a single headlamp, her fingers moving with impossible speed, clamping, suturing, saving. The metallic taste of blood and fear in her mouth. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of incoming chopper blades, a sound that was both salvation and a countdown clock. She would wake up in her small, bare apartment, her sheets soaked in sweat, her hand clenched around a phantom tool. She'd have to walk for an hour, her limp a painful metronome on the dark pavement, just to quiet the ghosts. She was a surgeon, a damn good one. She had held the space between life and death for the best men and women this country had to offer, and now she was cleaning up after a preening, incompetent fool. The injustice of it was a physical weight, a tumor growing in her soul. One afternoon, a young nurse named Chloe dropped a tray of vials in the hallway. Glass shattered, liquid spreading in a puddle on the polished linoleum. Chloe burst into tears, her face crumbling with stress and exhaustion. Before anyone could shout for a janitor, Anya was there. She didn't speak. She simply took a hazardous waste container from her cart, carefully picked up the large shards of glass with tongs, and then used a squeegee and absorbent powder to contain the spill. She worked with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful, her movements precise and efficient. When she was done, the floor was clean and dry. She looked at Chloe, whose tears were now ones of gratitude, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "It's okay," Anya whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "Breathe." Chloe stared at her, seeing for the first time not the mop, but a person, an island of calm in her frantic day. It was a small moment, a tiny crack in the wall of Anya's isolation, but it was something. It was a reminder that beneath the grey uniform, she was still there. The next day, the world broke. It started not with a bang, but with a sound that cut through the hospital's placid hum like a razor blade. The high, piercing shriek of sirens, not one or two, but a whole chorus of them, growing louder and more frantic by the second. They weren't the familiar, almost comforting wail of a local ambulance. This was different. This was the sound of chaos arriving. Heads popped out of doorways. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The air in Prestige Medical, usually so placid and controlled, suddenly crackled with a new, raw energy. A frantic call echoed over the intercom, the voice of the ER dispatcher tight with panic. "Code Black, mass casualty incident incoming. All available surgical staff to the ER, now. I repeat, Code Black." Anya was on the third floor, wiping down a handrail, when the call came. Her head snapped up. Code Black. She hadn't heard that term outside of a military field hospital. It meant the system was about to be overwhelmed. It meant hell was coming to the gate. Her body reacted before her mind could process it. The mop clattered to the floor. Her limp seemed to vanish, her stride lengthening, becoming purposeful. The tremor in her hand ceased, replaced by a stillness that was absolute. She wasn't walking. She was moving toward the sound of the guns. Down the hall, she saw Dr. Finch emerge from his office, a smug, excited look on his face. A crisis for him was not a tragedy. It was a stage. "People, let's move," he bellowed, clapping his hands together. "This is what we trained for. This is where prestige proves its worth." He strode toward the elevators, his sycophants scrambling behind him. He didn't even notice the janitor as she moved past him, her pace faster, her eyes fixed on the emergency stairwell, her face a mask of cold, hard focus. He was going to the theater. She was going to war. The emergency department was a maelstrom. Gurneys were being wheeled in at a run, each one bearing a broken, bleeding body. The source of the chaos was a motorcade collision on the nearby interstate involving a diplomatic escort. Secret Service agents in dark suits, some of them wounded themselves, were shouting, trying to maintain order. The air was thick with the smell of blood and fear, a scent Anya knew better than any perfume. She stood near the entrance, just inside the double doors, a ghost in the whirlwind, observing, assessing. Her mind, honed by years of battlefield triage, began to work automatically. Gurney 1. Male, late 40s, obvious head trauma, agonal breathing. Black tag. He was gone. Gurney 2. Female, 20s, compound fracture to the tibia, conscious and screaming. Green tag. She could wait. Gurney 3. Male, 60s, pale, diaphoretic, clutching his chest, uniform shredded. Multiple penetrating trauma wounds to the chest and abdomen. Red tag. He was the one. He was the nexus of the entire storm. Doctor. Finch arrived, sweeping into the trauma bay like a conquering hero. "Get me a status," he commanded, pulling on a pair of gloves with a dramatic snap. A panicked resident rushed to his side. "Sir, it's General Marcus Thorne, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. His convoy was hit by a truck. Multiple casualties. He's the worst. BP is 70 over palp, heart rate 140 and thready. We're pushing fluids and blood, but he's not responding." Finch's eyes lit up. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs. This was it. This was the case that would make him a legend. "Get him to Trauma 1. I want a full workup, chest and abdomen CTs, now. Page vascular, Page ortho. I'm leading this team," he shouted, shoving a nurse out of the way to get closer to the gurney. Anya watched him, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. CT? The man was actively exsanguinating. He didn't have the 20 minutes it would take to get him to the scanner and back. He needed a chest tube, a central line, and an OR 10 minutes ago. She saw the telltale signs Finch was missing in his arrogant haste. The distended neck veins, the tracheal deviation, so subtle only a trained eye would catch it. The general was developing a tension pneumothorax. His lung was collapsing, and the trapped air was crushing his heart. He had minutes, maybe less. A young intern, his face pale and slick with sweat, was trying to get an IV into the general's other arm, his hands shaking badly. "I can't get access. The veins are all collapsed," he stammered. Finch, busy barking orders at someone else, ignored him. "Somebody get a line in him," he yelled to no one in particular. The general let out a choked gasp, his eyes rolling back. The monitor beside him let out a long, terrifying beep as his pressure bottomed out. He was crashing. It was the sound, the beep, the sound of a life slipping away because of incompetence. It was a sound Anya had sworn she would never stand by and listen to again. She didn't think. She acted. She moved from the wall, her limp gone, her body a study in fluid purpose. She brushed past the fumbling intern. "Move," she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a command, clear, low, and laced with an authority that made the young doctor freeze. Before he could react, Anya had grabbed a 14-gauge catheter from the IV cart, an alcohol swab, and a glove from a box. She didn't put the glove on. She ripped the finger off it, creating a makeshift flutter valve. Her movements were a blur of efficiency. Swab the chest, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She knew the landmark like she knew her own name. She didn't hesitate. She found the space between the ribs with her thumb and plunged the large bore needle deep into the general's chest. Thump. There was a sudden, explosive hiss of escaping air, like a punctured tire. The general's body convulsed, and he took a deep, shuddering breath. On the monitor, the blood pressure numbers, which had been blank, reappeared. 85/50. Still dangerously low, but he was back. The intern stared, his mouth hanging open. The whole procedure had taken less than 5 seconds. Anya taped the catheter and its makeshift valve in place. A perfect, life-saving needle decompression. A battlefield procedure performed flawlessly in a civilian ER. Anya then turned her attention to the IV access. She grabbed a 10-milliliter syringe and a large-bore IV catheter. Ignoring the collapsed peripheral veins, she felt for the landmarks on the general's upper arm, just below the shoulder, the head of the humerus. She was targeting the intraosseous root, a direct line into the bone marrow. A difficult, painful, but foolproof way to deliver fluids when all other access was lost. She positioned the needle. "Don't!" a voice barked. It was Dr. Finch. He had finally noticed her. He strode over, his face purple with fury. "What in God's name do you think you are doing? I have a dying man here, and the janitor is playing doctor? Security!" he screamed. "Get her out of here, now!" 2 burly security guards, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm, moved toward Anya. She didn't look at Finch. Her eyes were locked on the general. His life was draining away with every second they wasted. "Sir," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "He needs IO access and a massive transfusion protocol initiated. He has a tension pneumo on the right and likely cardiac tamponade from a penetrating chest wound. He needs a thoracotomy, not a CT scan." Finch's face went from rage to disbelief. The string of technical terms, delivered with such cold precision from the mouth of the mop, was so incongruous it was like a dog starting to recite Shakespeare. What did you just say? He sputtered. Cardiac tamponade? You don't even know what that means. You clean toilets for a living. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. I said, get out! The security guards reached for her other arm. But just as they made contact, a weak, rasping voice cut through the noise. It was barely a whisper, a dry rustle of sound from the gurney. Every head turned. General Thorne's eyes were open, just slits, but they were focused. They weren't looking at the world-famous surgeon. They were looking at the janitor. He tried to lift a hand, but couldn't. His lips moved, forming a single, faint word. It was so quiet, Anya almost didn't hear it. But she did. Viper, he breathed.
Finch stared blankly.
What? What did he say? A nurse leaned closer. I think he said, Viper, sir. Finch scoffed. He's delirious, probably talking about a snake. Get her out, he commanded again, yanking on Anya's arm. The guards tightened their grip. Anya felt a surge of cold fire. She didn't struggle. She didn't have to. The general's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of desperate energy returning to them. He gathered what little strength he had left. The whisper came again, louder this time, clearer, imbued with the last ounce of a lifetime of command. That's Viper 6. The room went silent. Not a gradual quiet, but a sudden, shocking absence of sound, as if a switch had been thrown. The frantic beeping of the monitors, the shouting, the crying, it all seemed to fall away, leaving only those 3 words hanging in the air. Viper 6. The name meant nothing to the doctors, the nurses, the security guards. It was a nonsense phrase from a dying, delirious man. But it hung in the air with the weight of a pronouncement. Dr. Finch let go of Anya's arm as if he'd been burned. He stared from the general to the janitor, a flicker of confusion warring with the rage on his face. What is that? What does that mean? He demanded, his voice a half shout, half plea. Anya didn't answer him. Her attention was solely on the general. She saw the flicker of recognition, the desperate hope in his eyes. He knew. Of course he knew. He was Marcus Thorne, the architect of Operation Nightfall, the very mission that had ended her career. He wouldn't know her face, but he would know the call sign. It was a name whispered in secure intelligence briefings, a name synonymous with impossible saves in impossible situations.
He's hallucinating,
Finch declared, recovering his bluster. The trauma is affecting his brain. Now, for the last time, his voice rose to a full-throated roar. Get her out of my trauma bay! The security guards, jolted back into action, began to pull Anya away. She didn't resist. She simply kept her eyes on the general, a silent promise passing between them. But as they dragged her toward the door, a new sound intruded. A sound even more alien to the hospital than the earlier sirens. The deep, percussive whump, whump, whump of a heavy helicopter, flying low and fast, getting closer. It wasn't a medevac. The rotor wash was too powerful, shaking the very windows of the building. Everyone looked up, distracted. The sound grew to a deafening roar as the helicopter, a sleek, black-painted UH-60 Black Hawk with no identifying marks, settled onto the hospital's rooftop helipad, a pad reserved for dire emergencies and billionaire donors.
Seconds later,
the doors to the ER burst open again, slamming against the walls with a force that made people jump. 2 men in sharp, dark suits and earpieces entered first, their eyes sweeping the room with a cold, professional assessment of threats. They moved with the coiled energy of Secret Service agents. But they were not. Their posture was military. Behind them strode a man who seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. He wore the immaculate Class A uniform of a United States Army general, 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder board. His presence was an anvil dropping into a quiet pond. It was General James Iron Hand Jackson, commander of Special Operations Command, the only man in the military who outranked Marcus Thorne. Jackson's eyes, cold and grey as a winter sea, swept the chaotic scene. They bypassed the famous surgeon, the panicked nurses, the bleeding agents. They landed on the small, disheveled woman in the janitor's uniform, being manhandled by security. His gaze locked with Anya's. A flicker of something, recognition, relief, profound sorrow, passed across his stern features. He pointed a single, steady finger at her. His voice was not a shout. It was a low, gravelly rumble that cut through the chaos like a cannonball. "You two," he said to the security guards, "let go of Colonel Sharma now." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Colonel Sharma. The security guards released Anya instantly, stepping back as if they had been holding a live electrical wire. Dr. Finch stared, his mouth agape, his face a comical mask of utter bewilderment. He looked from the 4-star general to the janitor and back again. "Colonel," he stammered, a note of hysteria creeping into his voice. "Her? That's the mop lady. Her name is Anya. She cleans the floors." General Jackson's gaze shifted to Finch. It was a look of such pure, undiluted contempt that Finch physically flinched. "I know what she does here, Doctor," Jackson said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming more dangerous. "What you don't seem to know is who she is." He took a step forward, his polished boots clicking ominously on the linoleum. The 2 men in suits fanned out, creating a perimeter. "You stand in the presence of Colonel Anya Sharma," Jackson announced, his voice now resonating with pride and fury. "Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, 2 bronze stars with valor, and 4 Purple Hearts. The only non-SEAL to ever complete the Special Operations Combat Medic course and graduate top of her class. For 6 years on the front lines of every hellhole you can't even imagine, she was the lead trauma surgeon for a Tier 1 JSOC task force." Jackson paused, letting the words sink in. He took another step, his eyes boring into Finch. "Her operational call sign," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "is Viper 6, and you," he jabbed a finger at Finch, "have been wasting her time." The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Every person in the room, nurses, residents, agents, guards, was frozen, their eyes wide with shock, staring at the woman they had called the Mop. They were replaying 2 years of casual insults, of dismissive glances, of whispered jokes. They were recalibrating their entire reality. Anya stood still, the weight of the general's words settling over her like a heavy cloak. It wasn't a cloak of comfort. It was the uniform she had tried to escape, the identity that had cost her everything. General Jackson turned back to her, his expressions softening instantly. The terrifying commander was gone, replaced by a concerned mentor. "Colonel," he said, his voice now gentle, "report." It was the word that broke the spell. Report. A word that cut through 2 years of fog and pain. A word that brought her back. Anya's posture changed. Her shoulders straightened. The weariness fell away, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a field commander. General Thorne has a tension pneumothorax on the right, which I have decompressed with a 14-gauge needle, she began, her voice crisp and clear, the rasp gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated authority. He is profoundly hypotensive, unresponsive to fluid resuscitation. He presents with distended neck veins and muffled heart sounds. Beck's triad. It's not just a hemothorax, it's cardiac tamponade. The shrapnel from the initial blast, I can see the entry wound high on the sternum, has likely perforated the pericardium and is causing the sac to fill with blood, strangling the heart. She pointed at Finch, not with anger, but with the cold detachment of a superior officer identifying a failure in the chain of command. He was going to take him for a CT scan. It would have killed him. Finch looked like he had been slapped. The protocol, he stammered, his professional arrogance shattering into 1,000 pieces. The protocol is for stable patients, Doctor, Anya snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. This man is not stable, he is actively dying. She turned to the stunned surgical team. I need an OR, now, and I need a thoracotomy tray, a sternal saw, and 4 units of O-neg blood on a rapid infuser. Someone get me gloves and a gown. We are cracking his chest, here, in the next 60 seconds. No one moved. They were still paralyzed, staring at the woman in the grey janitor's scrubs, giving orders like a god. General Jackson took care of that. You heard the colonel, he bellowed, and the force of his voice physically jolted everyone into motion. Move! Nurses scrambled for supplies. A resident sprinted for the phone to prep the nearest OR. The fumbling intern from before now looked at Anya with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Finch just stood there, pale and trembling. You can't, he whimpered. You're not credentialed here. This is my hospital, my patient. I am the head of surgery. Anya didn't even look at him. She was already stripping off her worn grey top, revealing the faded green T-shirt of a military uniform underneath, and the latticework of old scars across her torso and arms. Your patient is about to be a corpse, she said coldly, pulling on a pair of sterile gloves that a nurse handed her, her movements impossibly fast. And this is no longer your hospital. This is my OR. General Jackson stepped directly into Finch's path, a human wall of 4-star fury. Dr. Finch, he said, his voice a low, deadly promise. If you interfere with Colonel Sharma's work in any way, I will personally see to it that you are charged with obstruction of a federal officer, medical malpractice, and treasonous incompetence. You will not only lose your license, you will spend the rest of your miserable life in a federal prison. Now, stand in that corner and do not speak, do not move, and do not breathe too loudly. Finch, his face ashen, stumbled backward and flattened himself against the far wall, looking like a schoolboy who had been caught cheating. The room was now Anya's. The transformation was absolute. She was no longer the ghost, no longer the mop. She was Viper 6, and she was going to work. The chaos of the ER condensed into a focused point of terrifying calm around Anya. The world shrank to the gurney, the dying general, and the tools of her trade. Scalpel, she commanded. A nurse, her hand trembling slightly, slapped it into Anya's waiting palm. The tremor in Anya's own hand was gone. It was rock solid, an extension of her will. She didn't have time for the sterile sanctuary of an operating room. The general's heart was being crushed. The OR was here. The time was now. This is going to be an emergency department thoracotomy, she announced to the room, her voice a lecturer's calm, belying the life and death urgency. A salvage procedure, low probability of success, but it's his only shot. She looked at the young intern who had been trying to get IV access. You. What's your name? Peterson, ma'am. Colonel, he stammered. Peterson, Anya said, her eyes locking on his. Your job is to keep bagging him. 1 breath every 6 seconds. Do not stop, do not slow down, do not get distracted. Do you understand? Yes, Colonel, he said, his voice suddenly firm. He had his mission. Anya made the incision, a long, sweeping cut from the sternum to the back along the 5th intercostal space. It wasn't the neat, precise line of a planned surgery. It was a warrior's cut, fast and deep, meant to save a life, not a cosmetic appearance. Blood welled up instantly. Rib spreaders, she called. The heavy steel instrument was placed in her hands. She inserted it between the ribs and cranked it open. There was a sickening series of cracks as the ribs gave way. The nurses and residents around her gasped. They had seen the procedure before, but never like this. Never with this speed, this raw, brutal efficiency. It wasn't surgery, it was controlled violence. With the chest open, Anya could see the disaster. The right lung was collapsed and dark. The pericardial sac, the fibrous bag around the heart, was swollen and blue-black, taut with the blood that was choking the life out of the organ within. It was exactly as she diagnosed. Cardiac tamponade. Forceps and scissors, she ordered. She carefully incised the pericardium. Dark, thick blood, almost black, spilled out into the chest cavity, releasing the pressure on the heart. The organ, which had been barely quivering, gave a violent lurch and then began to beat, weakly at first, then with more strength. On the monitor, the BP jumped to 90/60. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. But Anya wasn't celebrating. He's not out of the woods. Where's the bleed? Her gloved hand, impossibly steady, slipped into the chest cavity, her fingers probing with a sensitivity that no machine could replicate. She felt the heart, the great vessels, the lung. There, she whispered. A tiny, jagged piece of metal, no bigger than a thumbnail, was embedded in the wall of the right ventricle. With every beat of the heart, it tore the muscle a little more. It was a death sentence, ticking in time with his pulse. I need a 3-0 Prolene suture on a cardiovascular needle. And Pledgets. Now. Dr. Finch, still pressed against the wall, watched in a state of horrified paralysis. His world had been turned upside down. This woman, this janitor he had tormented for 2 years, was performing a procedure that he, the chief of cardiothoracic surgery, had only ever read about in textbooks. Her hands, which he had last seen wiping his coffee-stained trousers, were now inside the chest of one of the most powerful men in the country, literally holding his heart. The sheer, mind-bending cognitive dissonance was making him nauseous. He saw the looks on the faces of his staff, the awe, the reverence. They weren't looking at him anymore. They would never look at him the same way again. A whimper escaped his lips. General Jackson, standing like a statue nearby, heard it. His head turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Did you make a sound, Doctor?" he asked, his voice soft and deadly. Finch shook his head frantically, his mouth clamped shut, sweat beading on his forehead. Inside the chest cavity, Anya faced an impossible task. The shrapnel was in the worst possible place. To remove it, she would have to put sutures into the wall of a beating heart, a moving target, without causing a fatal arrhythmia or a catastrophic bleed. I'm going to need to control the vessel, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Peterson, on my command, I want you to stop bagging for 10 seconds. 10 seconds only. She looked at the anesthesiologist who had just arrived. You, get ready to push adenosine if we go into VTAC. The doctor, a man 20 years her senior, just nodded, his face grim. Yes, Colonel. Anya took a deep breath. She placed 2 fingers on either side of the shrapnel, steadying the tissue. Okay, Peterson, stop bagging. Now. The rhythmic squeeze of the ambu bag ceased. The room held its breath. Anya's hands moved in a blur. Snatched the shrapnel with the forceps. Pull. It came free with a sickening squelch. A fresh torrent of blood erupted from the ventricle. Suture in. First stitch. Second stitch.
Pledgets in place
To reinforce the fragile muscle. Tie the knot. A surgeon's knot. Perfect. Okay, bag him, she yelled. The 10 seconds had felt like an eternity. Peterson resumed bagging. The heart, miraculously, continued its steady rhythm. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. She had done it. She had sutured a hole in a beating heart. In an emergency room, with a crowd watching. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Her bad leg throbbed. The tremor threatened to return to her hand. She locked her jaw, pushing it back down. The job wasn't done. The aftermath of the surgery was as quiet as the procedure had been chaotic. General Thorne was stable, his chest closed with neat, clean sutures, a stark contrast to the brutal entry. He had been moved to the intensive care unit, his room flanked by the 2 silent men in suits. The ER had been cleaned, the blood mopped up, by a different janitor who moved with a new, profound respect in Anya's presence. The hospital staff spoke in hushed tones, stealing glances at Anya as if she were a mythological creature. She sat on a stool in a quiet corner, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. The blood-stained janitor's uniform top was in a heap on the floor. She was still in the green military t-shirt and her worn grey pants. General Jackson approached, holding a cup of coffee. It wasn't from the fancy machine in the attending lounge. It was from the ER pot, black and strong. He handed it to her. You always did your best work covered in someone else's blood, Colonel, he said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. Anya took the cup. Her hand was trembling again, the ghost of the nerve damage returning now that the fight was over. He was a good man, sir, she said, her voice soft again. He is a good man. He is, Jackson agreed, and he's alive because of you. Again. Anya looked down at the coffee. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was done. The war is never done with people like us, Anya, Jackson said, his voice gentle. It just finds new battlefields. He looked over his shoulder toward the corner where Dr. Finch was now being spoken to by 2 hospital administrators and a grim-faced man in a suit who looked like a lawyer. Finch was gesturing wildly, his face pale and sweating. His voice, usually so booming and confident, was now a high, pleading whine. It was a violation of every protocol. She's not licensed. She's a menace, he cried. The administrators were not looking at him with sympathy.
They were looking at him like a liability,
a multi-million-dollar lawsuit waiting to happen. His career is over, Jackson stated, not with malice, but as a simple fact. His reputation, his license, everything. He humiliated one of my best soldiers. I don't forgive that. The army doesn't forgive that. He paused. And more importantly, he almost let a great man die out of pure, unadulterated pride. There's no coming back from that. Later, after Finch had been escorted from the premises, pending an investigation that everyone knew the outcome of, Anya went to the ICU. She stood by General Thorne's bedside. He was still unconscious, intubated, a web of lines and tubes connecting him to the machines that were keeping him alive. But his color was better. His heartbeat was a steady, strong rhythm on the monitor. A sound she had fought for. A sound she had won. She reached out and rested her hand on his forearm, just for a moment. The skin was warm. He was alive. As she stood there, the young nurse Chloe came in to check his vitals. She saw Anya and stopped. "Colonel," she said, her voice filled with awe. "What you did? I've never seen anything like it." Anya just nodded, too tired to speak. "We're all so sorry," Chloe whispered, her eyes filling with tears, "for how we treated you. We didn't know." "It's okay," Anya said, her voice a low rasp. "You didn't. Now you do." The simplicity of the statement held no anger, only a profound sadness. Chloe nodded, wiped her eyes, and went about her work with a new, quiet diligence. The hierarchy of the hospital had been shattered and rebuilt in the space of a single afternoon, no longer based on titles or money, but on a currency Finch had never possessed: true competence. Anya stayed for another hour, just watching the steady rise and fall of the general's chest, a silent sentinel standing guard over the life she had pulled back from the brink. The snake had waited, and then it had struck. Not with venom, but with a scalpel. Weeks later, the world had settled into a new shape. Dr. Alistair Finch was a ghost. His name was scrubbed from the hospital's website. His face, once plastered on billboards advertising the cardiac center, was gone. He was facing a litany of legal battles: a medical board review that had already suspended his license, a lawsuit from the Department of Defense, and a civil suit from General Thorne's family for gross negligence and endangerment. The sycophants who had once orbited him now pretended they barely knew him. His fall from grace was total, public, and absolute. The whispers that now filled the halls of Prestige Medical were not about the mop. They were about the legendary Angel of the ER, the secret super surgeon who had saved General Thorne. The stories grew with each telling, becoming more and more mythic. They said she could restart a heart with her bare hands. They said she hadn't been a janitor at all, but a government agent on a deep cover mission. The truth, as is often the case, was both simpler and more complex. Anya was offered Dr. Finch's job. The hospital board, desperate to salvage their reputation and capitalize on the new legend, offered her the position of head of cardiothoracic surgery, along with a salary that was, as Finch had once so cruelly guessed, more than she would have made in a decade of cleaning floors. They promised her a corner office, a research budget, anything she wanted. She met them in the same boardroom where they had rubber-stamped Finch's every arrogant demand. She wore a simple black pantsuit, her hair pulled back neatly. Her limp was still there, a part of her, but no one saw it as a weakness anymore. They saw it as a testament. She listened to their offer patiently. When they were finished, she gave her answer. No. The board members stared, stunned. "But why?" the chairman asked, bewildered. "This is a world-class facility, the opportunity—" "Because this isn't my war," Anya said simply. "I fought it. I won. But my place isn't here." Her work at Prestige Medical had been a kind of purgatory, a self-imposed exile. The crisis with General Thorne had been her absolution. It had reminded her of who she was, but it had also reminded her of what she had lost and what she was truly meant to do. The epilogue of her story wasn't written in a hospital boardroom. It was written 6 months later at the Fort Bragg Special Operations Medical Training Center. General Thorne, now fully recovered, though with a formidable scar down his chest, stood on a podium. He was there to dedicate a new, state-of-the-art training facility, the Colonel Anya Viper 6 Sharma Advanced Trauma Simulation Center. Heroes are not always the ones with the guns, Thorne told the crowd of young, eager medics. More often, they are the ones who run toward the chaos when everyone else is running away. They are the ones who have the skills, the courage, and the will to hold the line between life and death. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd until it found her. Anya stood at the back, out of the spotlight, wearing simple army fatigues. She looked at peace. "We have one such hero with us today," Thorne continued, his voice thick with emotion. She was a legend on the battlefield, a ghost who appeared when all hope was lost. But her greatest act of heroism may have been one she performed in a hospital hallway, armed with nothing more than her knowledge and her courage, while lesser men tried to cast her aside. She reminded us that true worth is not in the title on your door or the uniform you wear. It is in what you can do when everything is on the line. After the ceremony, Anya wasn't mobbed by reporters or politicians. She was surrounded by the young combat medics, the new generation. They didn't ask her about the hospital or Dr. Finch. They asked her about the best way to place a chest tube in a moving vehicle. They asked her about controlling a femoral artery bleed under fire. They asked her for her knowledge, her experience, her scars, her limp, her trembling hand. They saw them not as defects, but as proof that she had been there. She had earned her knowledge in blood and sacrifice. She spent the rest of the day in the simulation lab, her hands steady once more, guiding the hands of a young sergeant, showing him the precise angle for a needle decompression. Her voice was calm, clear, authoritative. She wasn't Colonel Sharma, the decorated hero. She wasn't the mop, the hospital ghost. She was just Anya, a teacher, a protector, a surgeon in her truest element. She had found her way home, and in the quiet competence of her work, she sent a clear message to all who would ever see a veteran, a person with scars, a quiet worker in the background, and choose to dismiss them. Be careful. You never know when you might be in the presence of a giant. You never know when you might need one to save your life.